Welcome back to Behind the Fiction. And today we have something that's really cool. We're going to be talking about audiobooks and the creation of audiobooks. And we're talking with both the author of the Roseland series, Eric Ugland, and the narrator for the Roseland series, Candace Thaxton. So Candace, can you first just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Candace. I live in Brooklyn, New York. I am a voiceover artist, but I also am an artist in other ways, and a land steward and a food justice activist.
What is a land steward?
I manage a public park, a public food forest in Lower Manhattan.
Oh, really? Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a weird life.
And Eric, you and I met for the first time 2 years ago now. I was thinking it was a year ago or maybe a year and a half ago at 20 Books to 50K. It was a treat for me to meet you because I've been a big fan of your work for a number of years. Eric, for those who don't know, is the author of the Roseland series, as well as a number of other books. I think it's safe to say that he's a prolific author. So, Eric, welcome to Behind the Fiction.
Thank you.
So let's get started. I want to talk about first the idea of Roseland, Eric, and when you first came up with this and the idea. Roseland was originally, when it was first written, it was written and published as a number of standalone shortish books. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. It was originally written as 6 novellas that tied together as a single volume, with the idea that then there would be 3 volumes of 6 novellas each that would tie together the sort of overarching story.
So when you began this, was it? Did you have an 18-book arc that you planned on telling the story?
I had a 3-volume, a larger 3-act structure that I planned on telling. I didn't have it broken down into 18 parts, but I had, this is the first section, this is the second section, this is the third. And then I just kind of, as I worked, I progressively broke it down smaller and smaller. So when I would start volume 1, I would say, okay, this is the huge story I'm telling that takes 3 volumes. This is the mystery that takes 1 volume, and then each individual story has its own little mystery within it.
Did you intentionally, or is it safe to say that it almost follows like a TV series type storyline, where there are the individual episode stories, and there's the longer series, well, not season story, and then there's the entire series story? That's kind of the way the sense I get of it.
That's exactly what I was doing. Yeah. I just felt that was the best model to follow when you're writing something that's episodic in nature. Is TV's been doing it forever, and success, and seeing how readers would sort of take to it, and trying to hook the readers at the end of each book, and then provide them with the story that's going to keep them coming back.
And when you were writing this, there's a reason I'm asking this question. What is your writing? Where's your preferred writing spots? Are you alone somewhere? Are you in a crowd? How do you like to do it?
I mix and match a lot. Prior to sort of COVID lockdown, I would love to go to cafes and sort of write wherever. I did a lot of writing for this in bookstores, and I started writing this when I was living in New York, and so there's various public spaces, and write in a Dunkin' Donuts for 5 minutes, or on the subway or the bus. A bus can take an hour to go 10 blocks, but it's great writing time, and And then I moved to Los Angeles, and I would write at bars and wherever. Obviously now it's a little bit different, and I never leave the house anymore.
Sorry to hear that. So, and we'll get back to the story of Roseland, but I want to switch over. You're on the West Coast. I want to switch to the East Coast now, to Candace. And Candace, here a few years after Eric has written the book, you're contacted by Podium. Presumably, you're given a script. I don't know whether you were given all 3 scripts at once, or how does that work for you?
I think they gave me all 3, but I'm usually doing multiple audiobooks at once. So I read the first 2, I thought, just so that I could know where I was going. Because it's always important to kind of have a sense of who's going to come back, and, characters you've got to keep track of and stuff like that. And then I read the 3rd one after the fact. Yeah, or not after the fact. I read it right before I recorded it.
And did you record them sequentially, or were there gaps between them?
There were gaps because I had other deadlines. I had other projects. So like I did a book about Bonnie and Clyde, and I think between this one and book 2. And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of jumps all over the place. It's cool to like jump around genres like that too, you know, do something that's like, you know, this kind of cool noir kind of world, and then like go do some like, you know, Southern historical fiction. And then kind of, you know, it's cool to be able to kind of play all those roles.
And it's conceivable that people listening who listen to audiobooks a lot might feel like the creative work is all done by the author and the narrator is just reading. But I personally don't believe that that's the case, and I'm assuming that you don't as well. You're bringing your own creative flair to the story. So, I mean, how does that work for you? When you're sitting there reading the story for the first time, are you just absorbing the story, or are you thinking how you can bring the story to life?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think, you know, one of the things that I think in my particular voiceover career, I get tasked with a lot is a lot of multilingual books, polyphonic books. And so you know, I'm often having to be like, oh God, okay, now I've got to do an Australian accent, you know, like stuff like that. But then I think I just kind of take the ride of the story the first time I read it. Obviously I'm going through and I'm marking up like, okay, how do I say this word? Okay, where is this place? Like, what are these things, you know, that I need to look up? And then when it's time for me to actually record, I think it's a pretty like kind of intuitive embodied process. I also, after I get done recording, I go back and I edit myself. I kind of just do it all in one chunk. I don't like stop and edit while I'm doing it. And so I'll often listen back to myself and be like, oh, nope. And like go back and redo some things if I need to.
So Eric talked briefly about the difference between his side of the creative process pre-COVID and post-COVID. Pre-COVID, would you, since you're in New York, would you occasionally work in studios, or did you always work from a home studio?
It depends on the project. Sometimes I am offered in-studio gigs, but a lot of what I do from my house, yeah.
And what's the difference? Is it harder having someone there with you listening and in effect, presumably telling you immediately if there's a mistake?
No, I mean, it's a lot easier in a lot of ways because you've got somebody to kind of bounce your ideas off of. And I don't have to do my own editing, which is always nice. And They usually buy you lunch, which is always a perk. I don't have to feed myself. But you know, that's not always something that is, oh, my dog is drinking water. You can probably hear it. That is not something that's always possible. Yeah. And that's the other thing about working from home. I live in a loft in Brooklyn. So if my next door neighbor decides that it's time to have a Robin dance party at 11:30 a.m. or vacuum, like I have to wait and deal with those type of things that you don't have to do when you're in some big cushy studio. But yeah, both work great. What I like about doing it from home is that I can do it on my own schedule and my own time.
Okay. Well, before we switch back to Eric, I just want to let everybody know that I am a big aficionado of audiobooks. I love audiobooks. I run the audiobook division for LMBPN Publishing. And so for the books that we publish ourselves, I'm usually the one that's selecting the narrators and choosing things. For books that we sublicense to others like Podium, they will give us some suggestions. And when I heard your voice, I just thought, wow, that's perfect. And I was hoping that Eric would agree. And Eric did agree, and I was thrilled that you were able to take on this project. And I have to say that I think that your performance of Roseland is one of the best that I've ever heard in an audiobook, and I absolutely love it. So it's a treat for me to have you both on here.
Oh, shucks. Thanks.
So, Eric, back to you. Let's now talk about Roseland. Give us sort of the overarching storyline of Roseland, if you would.
The overarching storyline. It is about a stripper turned private detective who is investigating the death of her mother and the corruption of Portland, Oregon, I guess.
And this was a few years ago,
Yes.
before Portland was really in the news.
Yeah, this was started in 2014.
And I think one of the things that you wanted to do with the series, I know because I've had a chance to talk to you about this before, it was to sort of make Portland a character in the story.
Yes. I mean, it's an interesting city that is just kind of, I mean, all cities kind of have a unique flavor to it, but I felt that Portland has often been either unexplored or just satirized and hasn't necessarily been lived in as a relatively real place. And that's what I was aiming for, is trying to make it come to life, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you did. I've never been to Portland, but now I feel like I have from reading and listening to the books. Let's talk about the primary characters of Ginger, Ginger's mother, and Rhino. So when you're developing characters, are you I need to create the characters first kind of person, or do they just kind of develop as you write?
And there's a mixture. Usually I will have a point of inspiration that I'm coming from, and I will build it from there, start writing. I had the sort of genesis of who those characters were, and especially with Ginger and her family, knew the backstory that I was working from, and so a lot of it just sort of built out from there. Rhino was very vaguely based on someone I actually knew, at least in terms of his physical appearance and sort of initial personality. And so then I just sort of took it away from who that real person was so that I could make him his own unique person from everywhere else.
And Ginger is a PI. As you said, she wanted to become a PI, and so she just sort of just became a PI. She just sort of started taking cases. How closely did you want to follow the norms of the genre, and how did you want to vary from those?
Well, to an extent, I wanted to follow the norms of the hard-boiled genre, which is kind of the subgenre of noir fiction. And so I started doing that, but it's not as well known. So even if I am following the tropes and working through some of those kind of ideas, it does sometimes seems more like I'm subverting what noir or sort of contemporary mystery has become. And a lot of people seem to think that it somehow fits into cozy mysteries, which I've never really understood, but I've also not really pushed back against, just because it's such a good genre to sort of pull readers from.
I have to say that I've read some cozy, and most of the descriptions that I hear of cozy don't involve the kind of language that we have in Roseland.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a new term for me. I'm going to have to Google that after we get off of here.
Yeah, think Agatha Christie for cozy.
Okay.
Cozy mystery.
Murder, She Wrote.
Love it. Okay, got it.
So Candace, when you take on a project like this, and when you read, and when is it that you feel like you've got a sense of Ginger? Because it's just like, as a reader, a lot of times I'll read a book and then listen to the audiobook and go, wow, that's completely different than what I thought it was going to be. And in this case, it's like, oh my gosh, she's Ginger.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny that, or with Ginger, it wasn't hard. I think Ginger and I probably talk pretty similarly. We probably have a pretty similar sense of humor, that kind of like self-deprecating sarcasm. I come by that honestly. So it was one of those things where I read it and I was like, oh yeah, okay, I think I get how this goes, I mean, Eric would have to tell me whether I totally botched it or not. Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of rolled out, she does a lot of kind of like self-qualifying, or like, yeah, it just kind of is in there, and so you just got to kind of follow along behind it.
One of the things that I got such a kick out of with your performance is that there are, and I don't want to give anything away, but there are a number of scenes in all of the books where Ginger is startled. And in your performance, I mean, it's like you're startled. It's really
It was great.
I got much more out of that than from reading. And the reading, it's like, okay, yeah, she's startled again. But yeah, let's spin back to Eric here. Eric, I know you've had a chance to listen. So what were your thoughts when you heard your words brought to life in this way?
I mean, it was I mean, I don't want to sound too sort of gushing with praise, but it was definitely like I felt like this was how I had imagined it. You know, it was very accurate to what I had going on in my head. And sometimes with audiobooks, that's not necessarily the case, especially as the writer. You know, the other series I have that are audiobooks, I definitely allow the audiobooks to dictate more of how things are pronounced and sort of how that world comes alive in terms of language. But this one was very much like listening to how it had sort of with the internal monologue that I was creating while I was writing it, sort of listening to it. So I think it was very spot on, and it's just very enjoyable for me to listen to.
When you're writing, do you ever think, but your career's evolved a lot since you first started writing Roseland, but when you're writing, do you ever think about the fact that somebody's going to perform this at some point in the future?
More so now, just because I do have contracts in place where, you know, I have deliverables I have to give out. So I definitely, and I know the narrator of the other series really well at this point. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I do either make things easier or make things more difficult on purpose as I'm sort of writing it. I've definitely put in a few tongue twisters for him on purpose, but other than that, I don't really think about it.
And Candace, do you ever get the sense that an author gives zero thought to the fact that somebody's going to be performing this at some point?
Oh, man. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's been some moments where I'm like, you want me to say what? You want me to say what? You know, kind of things. But not in this case. And I have to say, like, the thing I really like about doing audiobooks is that I get to be all these characters, right? If I was just like a normal on-camera actor, I could only just ever look like this white girl here, you know, as opposed to like, I really loved being Rhino. Like, I kind of like hope in my next life I come back as a really big, strapping, gay Samoan dude. Like, that's what I want to be in my next life. I now know, because it was really fun to get to embody someone so very different than who I am, you know?
Yeah, and you could carry along big bags of guns wherever you go.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can do that now, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, probably not wise right now. So, from a narrator standpoint, when you're first previewing the book, so I don't know what's the term when you're reading it and kind of getting it ready to perform. What do you call that?
I just call it reading it, but yeah, okay. Previewing so when sounds good.
When you're reading the book, do you get wrapped up in the story, or are you just thinking about how am I going to do this?
In this instance, I definitely got wrapped up in it. Sometimes, yeah, I'm, you know, depends on the quality of the writing. Yeah, in this instance, I definitely got wrapped up into it, and I was like, oh man, I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder who's going to. That's total. Like, you know, I'd be like, I bet I know what's going to, you know, and like I was waiting to see kind of like whether this thing would be revealed or that thing would be revealed. But I'm also having to kind of at the same time partition my brain and be like, all right, how many Russian characters? How am I going to differentiate between those? Okay, like the Chinese mob bosses, how many of them are there? How am I going to, you know, like all of this stuff that you kind of also have to keep in mind just technically to be able to perform it.
And Eric, when you're writing Chinese mob bosses and Russian gangsters, do you have voices in your head, or are you just going with it?
I usually have. Usually, yeah. And I have the advantage of growing up overseas and spending a lot of time traveling in various sort of worlds. So I have experienced a lot of these individuals before. So I do have a lot of voices to sort of pull from in that regard.
So Candace, from a voiceover actor perspective, I did spend a few minutes on your website. I know that you have some language experience. How do you, maybe even when you're just getting started, how do you get these voices for these various characters that are, you know, non-American, they're not the people that you see on the street corner every day?
Yeah, well, I've traveled a lot too. I also live in New York, and I'm very blessed to have an incredibly diverse set of friends. So, you know, when all of a sudden I have to say some random Arabic, I can holler at my boy Tarek and be like, dude, help me, you know, with this one, it was my friend Tanya, like, you got to help me with this Russian, you know what I mean? Like, and so it's an amazing gift for many, many reasons, but to have friends who also find it really entertaining that all of a sudden you have to learn how to say like a whole phrase in Portuguese or whatever, you know what I mean? And so that always really, really helps. And it also in the same kind of way gives me kind of reference markers for people that I'm kind of borrowing their intonation, their lilt, their phrasing. Because you can hear those things even when someone's speaking English. You know, you can hear the way different languages inform not only the way we speak, the way we think, everything about how we operate, where our voice sits in our mouth, all of that, you know.
So Roseland Volume 3 is coming out January 11th, I believe, is the release day. But, of course, no one is going to start with Volume 3. We hope not. Anyway, I hope not. Start with Volume 1. And for people who are curious about, or people who are, there's this term called credit worthiness in terms of the length of a book. Is it long enough to use my Audible credit on it? These are long books. And Candace, you probably know this from narrating. The first one finished was a little over 16 hours, and the next two are 17 hours. So you've got 50 hours of fun, really fun, funny PI story entertainment here with the Roseland series. And I can't recommend it highly enough. This is a great collaboration between Eric and Candace, and I hope you guys will check it out. Eric, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Candace, thank you for interrupting your schedule to join us. I also really appreciate it. Your time is valuable, and we appreciate you helping us. Eric, where can people learn more about you if they're interested?
My website, ericugland.com, ericugland.com.
All right, and Candace, I know that you're involved in lots of different creative aspects. I don't know if you want to share any of your how to find out more about me stuff or not. If so, now's the chance. If not, I'll just thank you.
Yeah, you can just Google me. There's only so many of me.
All right, thank you guys very much, and thank you so much for listening and watching.
Thanks. Bye.